I have mixed feelings about Taryn and Locke going to Maddox for Locke to ask for Taryn's hand in marriage, because literally an entire family line got massacred in part by the man that you're asking right now for his daughter's hand in marriage. But everything's in chaos, everything's in turmoil. There is no rule right now. It is unstable. However, I can see Taryn wanting to continue with her plan because she needs stability. That's all she wants in her life after having the rug pulled out from underneath her as a child and feeling like nothing has been stable in her life in the world of fairy. Everything's been precarious. And she just desires that. So I could see her pushing for it. However, I'm slightly surprised by Locke continuing with this, because you'd think that he'd want to be the center of attention. And when all this is going on, he wouldn't be the center of attention. Jude and Vivi are foils of each other, not only in the sense that, Vivi is a fairy that yearns to be in the human world, whereas Jude is a human yearning to be in fairy, but also their relationship with Maddox, because Vivi views Maddox as only as his nature, as a monster, as a redcap that yearns for blood, and has a harder time coming to terms with this softer side of him, this side that loves her and her siblings, despite the fact that her siblings are not his blood kids. And she starts to question and doubt herself, wondering, maybe her sisters are right. Until then, he participates in this massacre and unalives her, Princess Rhea, who is the only other thing holding her to this world besides her sister. Whereas Jude views the softer side, this, loyal, loving side of him, and forgets his nature into this moment of the massacre. Literally, she mentions how she could not believe it because she thought he was loyal to the crown. And even though she is reminded of his nature, she's still searching for a reasoning, to justify his actions, to recontextualize it as being loyal still. Wait, I just realized something, even though I read this book, I think 5 times at this point. But earlier on this book, an annotation Holly Black put in was that Carden and the others thought that the twin Locke was dating after Nausea was Jude. And we learned here from Taryn, when Carden made her cry, he was saying that they thought Locke was dating Jude, and that's why they were punishing her. That, she's suffering in your place, Taryn. If you just told her, maybe she'll back down. And Carden's just trying to figure out a way so that they all win. But obviously that didn't work. But it also means that when Taryn says, but I couldn't tell you, it wasn't that she couldn't. She chose not to. She chose Locke over Jude because she yearns for stability, and Locke could offer it to her and Jude couldn't. When Jude thinks, there are so many broken things that I don't know how to fix, but I know how to fight, she's thinking, her and Taryn's relationship is broken. What just happened to the royal family? What she's supposed to be doing with Carden, the whole world, the whole way that the fairies treat humans. She can't fix any of that, but she can keep fighting against it. Wait, I didn't notice the importance of this moment because I was so focused on the fact that Jude wasn't glamored by Vivi and that she was going to be caught with the geese. And Vivi literally says, you're not wearing a charm. I saw you get changed. How is this possible? Whereas Taryn was glamored. So that means that she's not wearing a charm, which is, dangerous, especially after being around a lot of fairies. And there's a lot right here. But it also makes sense because Taryn never had personal experience as far as we know. Jude did. Jude was the one that was glamored by Oak, and after that she never took a charm off. This is one of the moments where I have such mixed feelings about Maddox, because he comes in and says, all right, Taryn, I want to talk to you about Locke, because when he asked for your hand in marriage, he upfront told me that, how fairies are, we're changeable, and mortals are fun to mess with. And Maddox told Locke, I've never found myself changeable, aka that he still has feelings for, Taryn and Jude's mother all these years later, even after what he did. But he's saying that, Taryn, are you sure you want to marry him because he's a fuckboy? However, it's interesting that when Jude approached him earlier saying, I want to be a knight, he outright stops her and says, we'll think about it after the coronation, because he wants to set her up for a better life. Whereas with Taryn, he doesn't outright stop her. He puts the information out on the table and allows her to make her own bad decision. So it's interesting that he's kind of tries to help Jude more than Taryn. This line by Maddox is very important when he says, there's no point in fighting if you're not intending to win. Because that's not only the way that he lives his life, but we see it's the way that Jude lives her life. And then also Oak in his story in The Stolen Heir. Okay, I will admit, it hurts that Taryn is looking back being like, I want you to be punished by Maddox, but knowing that Maddox won't. So she kind of sets Jude up being like, you should ask her about Prince Carden. And it hurts. But however, do you have a sibling? Because I swear to God, you've done it too, because I've done it, where you're like, I got raped, and I know my sibling's not. I am going to make sure that you get raped just as bad as I did. I love the way that Maddox is describing Cardan. He says he's a foppish sort of boy, no good with a sword. He's charming in a way and clever, but nothing worth protecting. Because it leads me to something I haven't had a chance to talk about, which is gender expectations and role reversal. Because to him and many others, you know, being strong, being powerful, being good with a sword, which is stereotypically a more masculine style of fighting and gaining power, even as Maddox says, is the style that many prefer. And so because Cardan does not possess that, he is automatically dismissed by Maddox, for instance. However, Cardan takes on more the style that Orennia and Taryn have, which is to use their words to manipulate others, and they gain their power that way. And I love Cardan for this because in part one, that's the style I would probably adopt more so than Jude's. But I love also that it's Jude and Cardan doing a role reversal, taking on what would be more stereotypically a masculine way of gaining power, and then him taking on a more stereotypical feminine style of gaining power. At the very end of this chapter, Jude asked Vivi for more time to decide if she would go into the mortal world with her. She has some things that she needs to settle. However, she holds up Cardan's, royal ring, and she puts down her unworthy mortal finger. And even Holly Black puts in an annotation below that Jude will not admit to herself what she truly wants in this world, which is to play the same game that Maddox is and to rule Fairy. Her putting on the ring is her first step of realizing that I don't want to leave this place. I want to rule it. I'm not a fan of Locke, but I don't hate him. And in part it has to do with the things that he does goes in accordance with his nature. And as we saw in the last chapter, Maddox literally says he has a harder time falling asleep denying his nature than feeling guilty what his nature made him do. Not justifying either of them. However, Locke's nature involves around love. And we learned that's what his mother is like. And we also learned in Oak's book that's what he is like. However, I want to talk about how Locke and Cardan are more similar than they would think because they were both disregarded and left to fend for themselves by their families. However, and we saw how this affects Cardan. However, we see and learn throughout this series and in the novella that at least Balkan took Cardan in and semi-raised him. Was he the best influence? No. But there was someone there, whereas Locke had no one. He didn't think he had any family. No one took him in. He fended for himself growing up, and he was rather young when his mother died. And yet his mother took the time to send all these golden acorns to her friends in hopes that someone would take her own unborn child and raise it. And Oak got a loving family. Was it a perfect family? No, as we later learned. But it still was a loving family, whereas Locke was left to fend for himself. This chapter with Orennia and Jude realizing that Oak is Dane's child and like Locke's half-brother is very interesting for numerous reasons. One of it is, it's showing Jude is so much like Maddox. She knows how he thinks, and she's able to piece things together and realize what his plan is. But also, Orennia turning to her and saying, you need to do something, help. He's too young to be on the throne. I don't want this for Oak. She's not going to do it herself. She's not going to try to stop Maddox. She turns to Jude and asks Jude to help. And in part, it fits within Orennia's style, which is turning to someone else to do the action part while she schemes in the background. But also, it's her slightly trusting Jude. And for all of Jude's life, she has not trusted Jude around Oak. But in this moment, she's putting her faith in Jude to do what is best for Oak. But this also illustrates the pitfalls to both their styles. For Jude, her taking on the actions means that she's putting on herself on the front lines and most likely to suffer the repercussions if it backfires. Whereas for Orennia, you're putting your total faith in someone else if you're, manipulating them to do the actions. And she put her total faith in Maddox, hoping that he would do what was best for Oak. And it backfired because now he's using Oak as a pawn to get closer to the throne. And so she has to turn now to Jude and hope that she will do what's best for Oak. When Jude says, the odd thing about ambition is this, you can acquire it like a fever, but it is not easy to shed. Once I was content to hope for knighthood and the power to force Cardan and his friends to leave me alone. All I wanted was to find some place to fit in here in Fairy. Now I wonder what it would be like to choose the next king, which leads back to what Dane said early on, where you can get the golden thread, but you're not content because now you want the golden needle. This moment is one of the best because Jude comes back after having the worst weeks. She's had the worst few weeks, but last night sucked more because, you know what, with the whole coronation and then fighting her sister and then like barely getting any sleep and like this big revelation that leads to her plan that she's starting to scheme. She's never done anything like this before, so she doesn't know what she's quite doing. She's a little nervous and she's coming back fully expecting to see Carden like cowering, like how she left him, and everyone to realize that he's the worst, that she's right, he's terrible. They're all laughing. They all love him. They think he's the best. And I think it's also the continuation of the shattering of her perception of him, that he's fully disregarded that mask that he has used around her for her entire life. And this is a completely different version of him she is seeing, and it's kind of rocking her. When Jude thinks, if he undermines my position here, if he manages to make me an outsider, then I am never going to get the Court of Shadows to go along with the plan that is still jumbled up in my head. This leads to the other part of her relationship with Carden, how she views him as a gatekeeper to the world of fairy because she hasn't interacted with the other royalty. So to her, Carden is the thing standing in her way. For most of her life, he at least has influenced the other fairy kids, gentry, to ostracize her. And she finally, a couple of chapters ago, acknowledges that the Court of Shadows have accepted her, that she's finally taking a step into fairy being accepted. And now Carden is once again standing in the way as the gatekeeper. One of the reasons why I love the way that this is written is because Jude deludes even herself, that she doesn't even like acknowledges aspects of herself and hides it. However, it slips through every now and then. Case in point when she says, it occurs to me, if I kill him, I can finally stop thinking about him. If I kill him, I won't have to feel like this anymore. And if you read between the lines, that is her kind of acknowledging that she does have feelings for him. It's slipping through, but also it is mirroring what Carden says a little bit later, I think in this chapter, when he says that I can't stop thinking about you and I hate it. This moment right here is also a perfect example at the power of like Carden's words, that the way he's talking to her gets her to slowly lower her crossbow, and when she realizes that I am nearly freaked out enough to shoot him outright, he didn't have to disarm her with a weapon. He did it with his words. Carden's reaction is interesting when he learns that Jude unaliving Valerian came out of him attempting to unalive her once in the tower, then twice when he came into her room, because he thought that she had hunted him down, that she was just like Maddox, that she's truly terrible. But now that he learns this detail, he goes, oh, thank God, you were just defending yourself, which then kind of helps him prop up this idea of her that he has, of her being noble. A couple months back, I stitched another person's video explaining why Carden truly hates Jude, and it's not for childish, stupid reasons, though he acts childishly. It's for what he says exactly on page 312. I hate you because your father loves you, even though you're a human brat born to his unfaithful wife, while mine never cared for me, though I am a prince of fairy. She is a human, the bottom of the hierarchy, he is at the top. She has every reason not to be loved by Maddox. There's so many things working against her, yet he loves her in his strange way. And while things are all supposed to be working in his favor, he receives none of it from anyone in his family. Just first, I love the way that she describes kissing Carden, because she says, but kissing Locke never felt the way that kissing Carden does. Like taking a dare to run over knives. Like an adrenaline strike of lightning. Like the moment when you swim too far out in the sea and there's no going back. Only cold black water closing over your head. And in general, I just love the way that she described it. But also that last bit about, the cold black water closing in overhead, it's paralleling a couple different scenes where she talked about drowning. The first one that comes to mind is on page 229 when they are first arriving to the coronation. She says, Vivi says, sweeping Taryn and me along with her. We escape into the crowd and moments later we are drowning in it. The only way to truly join and enter fairy is if you throw yourself in completely and drown in it. And we're seeing that with her kissing Carden. I also love that when she talks about kissing him initially, she says he's still as a statue, but when his eyes close, lashes brush against her cheek, I shudder as you're supposed to when someone walks over your grave. And it's this continuation of a death motif, right? With kissing him, with the drowning and now the walking over a grave. It's as if she's saying to love him would be to kill a part of herself. And that part of herself that she would be killing off is the anger against him that is fueling her every move and action right now. It's interesting that when Jude looks into the Lake of Masks, she sees a glimpse of her mother and Maddox, a younger version of them, waving, and her mother saying, look, a human girl, and Jude thinks, run. She's telling her mother, even though she knows that it doesn't mean anything, to run away from this world, to run away from Maddox. but yet she doesn't take the advice for herself. I love during this conversation between Jude and the ghost is like, no, I'm going to stay here with you. You got a plan, right? Carden says that you do. He says that if you're going to make a trade, you would have done it already. And if you're to betray us, you have done that by now too. And I just love that, like, Jude's a little taken aback by it, but like Carden knows her that well. That like, despite never truly interacting with her, just watching her from a distance, he knows her that well. The heartbreaking part about what just previously happened, where proving Carden knows Jude so well, is that Jude doesn't know Carden, because Carden literally tells her, I don't want to be anywhere near power. Make it a part of our bargain with Balkan that I'll crown him, but set me up far away from court. I will never interfere with his life. You can forget I exist. I don't want to be anywhere near this. And she completely disregards this. And when she wakes him up, she says, shh, I'm going to give you something better than life. Because she thinks, who wouldn't want power? He doesn't. The sad irony of Jude having to convince Carden into entering an oath with her because she doesn't trust him is the fact that she's more untrustworthy. Fairies can't lie, and they have to abide by oaths. Yes, they will find loopholes, but they usually are hard to find, whereas with humans, they can lie, they can break oaths, and Carden completely trusts her. Jude's confused, wondering why Carden seems so comfortable here, that it almost seems like he prefers the nest of spies and assassins to the splendors of his own bed. And it's like, well, yes, because they're at least a little bit more upfront with who they are, and actually slightly more trustworthy than the rest of the people in his lives who, to his face, act like they like him or are friends with him, but in actuality, they're scheming, ready to stab him in the back. I didn't notice this half a dozen times I've read this story, because predominantly I think of Carden later in the book when they're about to do the other crowning, and Jude just got back from fighting Maddox and she's spiraling, and Carden picks up and he helps her out by making a joke of saying, have I told you how hideous you look tonight? And immediately she calms down. But he does it here also because, you know, he tells her what to expect from the queen of moths, and she goes, okay, I say, sucking in a breath. And he grabs her wrist and says, take care, because he does genuinely care for her well-being. But then he makes a joke saying, it would be very dull to have to stay here for an entire day just because you went and got yourself killed. And she instantly is calm and goes, my last thoughts would be of your boredom. And like, it helps. He knows her so well, and I love that. I love that the two that Carden suggests Jude go talk to is Lord Robin and Severin, because they are important characters that play a role in the darkest part of the forest with Severin, and I believe Lord Robin in the Court of Termites play a role in Tithe. I haven't read that series yet, that's next on my list, but I do know Severin plays a major role in the darkest part of the forest. In this moment, Jude is starting to realize that Carden isn't useless, that he actually has a wealth of knowledge that is useful with their schemes, as he regales why they should approach Lord Robin and Severin. And the other thing is that Carden doesn't even realize that he's not useless, because he's been told that for his entire life. And this is actually, I think, the first taste of scheming for him. And obviously we watch him grow accustomed and try to make his own schemes that backfire at the end of the second book. I love when Jude interacts with the Court of Termites in Severin's court, that she's realizing that the rest of Fairy don't look identical to the part that she lives in, and it surprises her, because she's painting in broad strokes. She thinks that fairies all alike, whereas like there are definitely courts that are worse than the one that she's been a part of, but there are ones like these two where they have a more symbiotic and respectful relationship with mortals. And she's, you know, surprised when Severin has a mortal lover and mortal knight, and also the Court of Termites are eating Chinese food, and like his lover is wearing human clothes. And it's realizing that it's possible, and I think that gives her hope, but it's also showing that Carden kind of wants that future too. That's why he pushes her towards that. When Jude is asked why does she care, why is she getting involved, she says, because this is where I live, this is where I grew up, even if I hate it half the time, it's mine. And it's kind of similar to her relationship with her siblings. Like, yeah, she might hate Vivi and Taryn half the time, but she will defend them with her dying breath. And I feel like we all can relate to that. There's some person in our life or our hometown that, yeah, we will, you know, ridicule it, but if someone else did, oh, they're done. I also love that us readers who are big Jude fans sometimes forget that she isn't always as confident or, you know, as badass as we think she is. Like, that's how we remember her as. But in actuality, she's just putting on a mask because she is terrified. Like, and we see that once again here, where she says that she's trying to project the same confidence I did in the Court of Shadows, the same confidence I did with Carden. I can't let him see that I'm scared, or at least not how scared I am. And she says something very similar to this early in the book in regards to Carden. When Jude says, I go back to my house, Maddox's house, I remind myself, never really mine, never mine again after tonight. Now, this line is interesting for a couple different reasons. One, it's her reminding herself that her existence in this world is precarious, that everything can be ripped out from underneath her, just like it was when she was a child, that she, in at least her mind, hasn't been accepted into the world of fairy yet. However, it could also just be in reference to how she thinks that she kind of needs to shed her old self, like a snake shedding its skin, disregarding it and leaving it behind. And that she's a new person, a new, entity, not realizing that that's not how humans work. We grow bigger and we grow more ferocious, like a lion cub turning into a lion, but we still have our scars. We can't shed that part of ourselves. It will always exist. And just like that, she will always be accepted into Maddox's house, as we see in the next book. Yes, he's furious that she outmaneuvered him, but he still sees her as his daughter. The interesting thing about the first book is that Taryn and Jude are given numerous opportunities to go back to the mortal world, because they're at this point in their lives where they're graduating childhood into adulthood. They're finally given the freedom to pretty much make their own choices. Prior to that, they would have followed wherever Vivi took them, which she did take them back to the mortal world at one point until she brought them back, or the fact that Maddox brought them to, Fairy against their will. But now they finally have a choice, and they're at this fork in the road, and continuously we watch them veer towards Fairy. And this moment with Vivi is Jude finally closing that door to go back to the mortal world. She's saying, I know in my heart of hearts that I will never be happy in the mortal world. Even if I'm safer there, I'll face whatever consequences and problems that, come with me choosing to stay here in Fairy. The interesting thing about this whole plan is that Jude was banking on Vivi agreeing to raise Oak. And I totally don't disagree, or I totally understand Vivi's hesitation, because she's 18, 20, 22 at most, and being asked to raise this child in a world that she's been mostly just visiting in. She doesn't truly exist in the mortal world. She doesn't understand its systems. And then to be asked to raise a child, which she doesn't really have that much experience with. She's been a big sister, but hasn't raised someone. And then to be asked to raise this child to become a future king. Something she has no idea about. Of course, I would be panicking. I would be like, I don't know about this. However, I think she agrees because, one, she would do anything for her sisters, but also Jude is giving her the excuse, I think, that she's been looking for, which is the allowance to live in the mortal world without guilt. Because I think she would have felt guilty leaving her sisters behind and living in the mortal world, but Jude is saying, go live in the mortal world, take care of her brother. I won't hate you for this. I want you to do this. This video is going to be part literary analysis of the Cruel Prince, but also a tip for writers, because as I've been writing for the last couple years, I've spent pretty much equal amount of time doing heavy research on how to improve my craft, and my current hyperfixation is on theme. I can't remember who said it or where I heard it, but they were saying that your theme should anchor your story. It should dictate your plot and your character development. And in my head, I was kind of correlating it to what a couple of authors, the first ones to come to mind are V.E. Schwab and Holly Black, what they say when they create their characters. And they look for their desire, their fear, and a lie or misbelief. And those three elements should dictate their characters' every thought and action. And, for me to contextualize this information, I like to look at stories I've read recently or my favorites to see if I can pinpoint these. And the easiest one for me to pinpoint was in The Cruel Prince. Now, The Cruel Prince has a lot of different themes, but the main ones are power, truth, and identity. And when you look at Jude's main desires, fear and lie or misbelief, it relates to those themes. Now, she has a couple different ones, but the main one in my head for her biggest lie is that she needs to earn her place in Fairy. Technically, she already has a place in Fairy. Maddox gave her a place in Fairy. She technically is allowed to live there. She's kind of safe, but not entirely. And she's already a step higher than most humans by being educated alongside the gentry. However, she is not truly accepted, as her classmates continuously remind her that she does not belong, that she should go back home. So she believes that if she can earn her place in Fairy, then they cannot dispute her place there. And so that's why she's working towards being a knight. But that also works in tandem to power, because the level of power you have is also in relationship to your hierarchy. She's at the bottom of the hierarchy. So she thinks that if she gets a little bit more power, climbs the hierarchy a little bit more, then she'll have a little bit more freedom and choice in her direction of her life. Which, if you look at the opposite end of the spectrum, that's not the case. Carden technically has power, but he does not have freedom or choice in his life and actually has a target in his back. Now, the hierarchy in this world also is dictated by you know, a couple different things, like not only your power, like, you know, magically, but like how you wield it, but like your ruthlessness. Because if you look at red caps, they're technically high up in the hierarchy. They're generals and they're very ruthless. However, they're not at the top because the Fae, such as Balkan, Dane, and Cardan, have magical power, but they're also equal parts ruthless. That's why they're at the top. And that's why we get, you know, Jude's famous line of, if I cannot be better than them, then I would become so much worse. She thinks that she needs to be more ruthless to then be able to gain more power and climb up the hierarchy. And as Dane says in the first book, if once you get the golden thread, you're going to want the golden needle. It is never enough. And we see that with Jude throughout her journey, that she continuously reaches for more power because she thinks if I get a little bit more power, I'll be a little bit safer. And I love, though, that you can see this desire, fear, and misbelief playing in her every thought and every action. That every time she needs to make an action, it falls back on this lie and misbelief. And that's why I love this series. There's so many other reasons, but I hope that helps with your writing journey. One of the reasons why I like Jude and the fact that she's our narrator is that she lies to herself, because we all do it too. We all lie to ourselves, and we see that here where she goes, against my better judgment, despite the fact that he is terrible, Cardan is also fun. Like, we want to hang on to a belief that we like begrudgingly admit, like, I guess he's fun too. The other interesting thing is that Cardan's wearing shades of cream. Like, they took the outfit from Dane's and like tailored it to fit him. But normally we've been seeing him in black, and we continue to predominantly see him in black. So it's easy to see him as a villain, for Jude at least to see him as a villain. But he's in cream, which is stereotypically what you would put the hero in. And so it's interesting that now her feelings and opinions of him are starting to change. When Jude says, I grew up thinking of strategy as finding weaknesses and exploiting them, that I understand, but making people like you, making people want to take your part and be on your side, that I am far less skilled at. See, her strengths are finding the weaknesses of how to exploit them, which is a good strength. But when she's paired with Cardan, that's what makes him unstoppable, because Cardan is good at making people like him and side with him. And we see that time and time again when he actually tries, like a case in point with the Court of Shadows, he can sway them his way. Once again, we're seeing that Cardan's desire is to be deemed useful because he was ignored and dismissed by everyone in his family for so long. And we saw it when the ghost was threatening to unalive him. He goes, no, I can tell you whatever you want, whatever you need. I can be useful. And he says it again when Balkan comes up to him. Cardan says, I turned out to be useful after all. What a terrible surprise. This moment is the start of the continuation of everyone underestimating Jude and Cardan. Because, you know, for instance, we saw Cardan saying that to Balkan, like, oh, I can be useful. But then we see it now with Jude. When Maddox comes over, she says, I am sure he's thinking me a fool who expects to get pat on the head for finding the missing prince, and cursing himself for not making it clear that he wanted Cardan brought to him and not to Balkan. I gave him my best blithe smile, like a girl who thinks she has solved everyone's problems. She is using the fact that he is underestimating her to her advantage, and we as a reader know that she has more to her scheme. So Maddox puts a hand on Jude and says, Balkan, I hope you're going to reward my daughter for bringing Cardan here. You know, it must have taken some persuasion. And Cardan gives Maddox an odd look. And she thinks that it's because, you know, she remembers him saying that it's weird that Maddox treats her so lovingly, whereas his father completely ignored his existence. And I think that's part of the reason behind his look. But I think the other one is that he is, for this moment, questioning his trust in Jude. Like, is she actually working for Maddox, working against him? The best part about Cardan is that he says something and you can take it a couple different ways, because right here he says, Jude here made me her prisoner. She ties very tight knots. And yes, she actually did do this, so he's not lying at all. She did make him her prisoner and did tie him to a chair. However, the way he's saying it, and it's like the way he's been presenting himself for most of his life, Nursey is probably like, you guys had sex? Jude describes Taryn giving her a look of like resentment when she sees Jude with Cardan and she's there with Locke. And I think it probably has to do with like a sibling kind of thing, which I totally understand. Like when you look at your sibling, you, especially someone like these two where they're twins and constantly being compared. So Jude feels like she's not living up to the expectations of everyone. Like Aurenia, she's not the same as Taryn. But Taryn probably feels the same way, that she's not living up to the expectations of Maddox. You know, she's not the same as Jude. And she probably thought, I finally won up Jude. I finally secured my place in this world. And I'm marrying someone that is a part of the gentry. I did great for myself. And then Jude shows up with a prince. Like, I would be a little salty too. I am dying when Jude says, he gives me a tight-lipped smile of someone who's being abandoned and nods once. He is loving this moment right now. It's like living out one of his fantasies. He has Jude on his arm. They're on the same side. They're not fighting. They're, maybe bantering, but not fighting. They're not on opposite ends. They're together and they're at a party. It's like living out one of his fantasies. And if she walks away, what if it's over? What if this dream pops and it never comes back again? And he doesn't want it to end. Like, I think he would cling to her if he could. When Jude reveals to Maddox that she knows about Oak, and he goes, oh, you knew about this plan, she says, he stares at me as though I'm a stranger, but I have never felt less like one. For the first time, we are both unmasked. And on one note, it is Maddox realizing that she is no longer a child. She is an adult. It's a feeling that I think most parents have, that they look at their child for the longest time as if they're still 4, but then realizing they're fully grown adult making their own decisions, that we have to let them do that. And that she has not only taken his lessons, but now she is running with it. But her saying that we are both unmasked, it's realizing that we're not playing the daughter, father anymore. We're taking that mask off. I'm going to be standing on the other side of the board with you, that I am your equal. And I want you to recognize that now. When Jude asks Maddox to make a bargain, to, step down when Oak is old enough to no longer need a regent, to no longer take the power, he cannot. And she says, I know he loves Oak. He loves me. I'm sure he loves my mother too in his own way. But he is who and what he is, and I know he cannot promise. And it's that realization that, yes, he has his love. He does genuinely love them. However, his ambition overrides that love. And it's very similar to Snow in the prequels for Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I think he does love Lucy. We see moments of that. However, his love for Lucy is not enough. His ambition and his need for security overrides that love. When Jude gives that grand reveal to Maddox of, oh, I bet you're not feeling well. Well, I poisoned you. And he goes, how did you know which cup I would take? She said, I poisoned them both. And in this moment, she's throwing the gauntlet down and revealing to Maddox, I will go however far to get what I want. I am willing to poison myself to beat you. When Jude says outmaneuvering Maddox wasn't nearly as satisfying as I wanted it to be, especially since I was able to do it because he never thought of me as someone who would betray him. One, she's doing exactly what Maddox just did. No one expected him to participate in this coup to betray others because they believed in his loyalty. And, for the court and for Dane. And she just did the exact same thing, but she's bitter because she thinks he's underestimating her, that he will always see her as a child, that she is never going to be equal enough to be up on the board alongside him, to invite her to the table, that she is worthy of this, which is a continuation of her thinking that she's not worthy to be a part of this world, that he doesn't see her this way. But it also made me think of her vendetta against Carden, that the moment that she outmaneuvers him and has her revenge, it's not as satisfying as she thinks it would be. I kind of love that Locke comes over interrupting and says, I admit, I am a little jealous to see Carden parading you around on his arm. And she's like, I don't have time for this. Because he thinks that she did this on purpose to make him jealous, that she's still playing by this story that he curated, not realizing that she's completely jumped page, went into a different book. She's now in Game of Thrones. She's not in your romance anymore, buddy. And I love this. Oh, Locke, buddy, a little desperate because he's like, I liked you. I still liked you. And she's like, you picked my sister. She's completely loyal. So he's misjudging her in this sense, but he's trying to cling to Jude because he recognizes her as being a variable that would make his story extremely interesting. That, it would be a little boring if he just gives up on Jude and picks Taryn. So he doesn't want to lose her, but he doesn't realize yet that the way to keep Jude in his story is to, continue to play the love interest. No, he realizes by the next book that to keep Jude in his story, he has to become her antagonist. I might genuinely start crying at how cute Carden is because he's trying to maintain this fantasy of him and Jude just being a happy couple. Because when she sits down, he goes, there you are. How has your night been going for you? Mine has been full of dull conversations about how my head is going to find itself on a spike. Once again, with the sarcasm, love it. But also just like a normal couple like conversation. Like, I love it. This moment right here is one of the main reasons why I love Jude and Carden. I think about this moment so often, and we saw a glimpse of something similar earlier in the book, but this is the one I think about more often. And it's when Jude just comes back from fighting Maddox, and she is still reeling from that. That was a big thing in her life, that she's fighting Maddox, her father figure. And then it makes her kind of spiral to worry about the trajectory of the rest of their plan. So she's spiraling, and Carden recognizes that and knows he needs to help her. And so the way to help her is to kind of tease her, to fall back into their, old ways of bantering. And he says, "Have I told you how hideous you are tonight?" And she instantly stops spiraling and goes, "No, tell me." And he says, "I cannot," because one, he can't lie, and he thinks that she's gorgeous, and I love that. But the fact that he recognizes that she is spiraling and she needs help, and the best way to help her is not to say, "You've got this, I have full faith in you." No, it's to kind of fall back in their old roles of him teasing her. This is a sign of how much Carden trusts Jude, because he's allowing the roach to shoot at him. He's trusting that they're not going to just kill him on the spot. That's how much he trusts Jude, and it's not like she's offering him that much better of a bargain. Carden. This paragraph at the bottom of page 364, where Falcon covers Carden's body and Jude's realizing how interesting the relationship is, it made me realize that Carden and Jude are nearly identical. On page, they're very similar. There's small differences. They were both raised by their family's murderers. Now, Balkan more recently unalived the rest of his family, whereas Maddox killed Jude's parents from the beginning, and she was living with her parents' murderer for her entire life for the most part. And I think that changes their relationship a little bit. But Maddox and Balkan were the ones that took these two in and raised them, the only ones. And they raised them to be strong in their own way, which kind of worked and backfired in both cases. But Maddox showed a little bit more love towards Jude in his own weird way, compared to Balkan did not show enough love towards Carden. However, when all is said and done, neither of them can shrug off Balkan or Maddox. Even when both of them continue to scheme against them, they cannot bring themselves to executing either of them. It's too hard. They can't. They still have this relationship with them. Oh, this is just so much better and so much worse, because Carden kneels after Jude tells him to kneel to show Oak what to do, and he whispers to her, "Phase 4, still believing we're on the same side." And he is about to get the betrayal of his life. Also, Holly Block's annotations during the scene is amazing, because she says he's legit having fun conspiring with Jude. He feels as though he's discovered something he's good at. And then after Oak crowns him, she puts, "Not having fun anymore, though." The interesting thing about Vivi and wanting to be a part of the mortal world is that she would never truly integrate herself into it. Like Jude says here, that she would never get a conventional job. It's always kind of like a vacation home for her. That she, of course, yearns to be there because that's where she had her happiest memories prior to Maddox coming. And so that's where she wants to be, but she's never wants to be truly like the mortals. And we do see other fairies take on conventional jobs and be living alongside the mortals. She doesn't. Once again, we're seeing that, Jude says, "I left him with only a few commands, a familiar hatred in his face, enough to make a coward out of me," with between Jude and Carden. All Carden wants is for Jude to trust him the way that he trusts her. And he would have probably done nearly anything she had asked him if she had just proven it. The fact that she commands him makes him bitter. This moment at the end of the epilogue is interesting because during the heat of the moment, Balkan says, "We both know you don't want power, Carden. You just want to have fun. You want to reap the benefits of power. You don't want the responsibility of ruling." And we see him living up to that expectations here when he tells Jude, "Very well, I will be your puppet. You rule. You contend with Balkan, with Robin, with Orla of the Undersea. You be my seneschal, do the work, and I will drink wine and make my subjects laugh. I may be the useless shield you put in front of your brother, but don't expect me to start being useful." Which is so interesting that he's just living up to the expectations everyone has of him again, but also the useless element coming back into play.